In a windowless hall near Athens, a great light blazed up in the dark, and no one who saw it ever spoke of it. Thousands of people passed through that hall. Philosophers, generals, emperors, ordinary farmers. For nearly 2,000 years they came every autumn, saw whatever waited inside, and carried it to their graves in silence. Not because they forgot, because they were sworn never to tell, and in Athens, breaking that oath could cost you your life. We know the name of the place, Eleusis. We know the festival ran for almost 20 centuries, longer than most religions have existed. But the one thing that mattered, what actually happened in that dark hall, is the best-kept secret in human history. And it very nearly stayed buried forever. Here's what should stop you. In 415 BC, one of the most powerful men in Athens, a general named Alcibiades, was accused of imitating the ritual at a private dinner party. Just imitating it. He was condemned to death, and the priests of Eleusis stood on the sacred road and cursed his name. A man was sentenced to die not for revealing the secret, but for playing at it. So whatever they were protecting, the Greeks guarded it more fiercely than almost anything else in their world. And that raises a question they never let anyone answer out loud. What was worth keeping like that? To understand the secret, you have to understand the story underneath it. The mysteries belong to two goddesses, Demeter, who ruled the harvest, and her daughter Persephone. The myth is simple and terrible. Persephone is stolen away into the underworld by the god of the dead. Her mother, grief-stricken, lets the whole earth go barren until a bargain is struck. The girl returns to the light for part of each year and sinks back into darkness for the rest. That's why the crops die in winter and return in spring. But the Greeks didn't just tell this story at Eleusis. They found a way to make people live it. And that is where the ordinary explanations start to break down. Because the mysteries weren't a lecture or a play or a sermon, ancient writers who went through it agree on one strange point. It wasn't something you learned. It was something that happened to you. Aristotle observed that the initiates were not there to be taught a fact, but to be made to feel, and to be put into a certain state of mind. People walked in as one kind of person and walked out as another. And the Greeks, who could describe anything, who invented philosophy, drama, and democracy, suddenly went quiet when asked what they had seen. That silence is the real mystery. What could do that to a mind and leave no words behind? We can rebuild the outside of the ritual because that part wasn't secret. Every autumn, thousands of initiates gathered in Athens and walked to the sea to wash and purify themselves. Then they marched, a procession nearly 14 miles long, down the sacred road to Eleusis, carrying torches, calling out the name of a god, many of them fasting for days. By the time they arrived at night, they had been walking, hungry and sleepless, in a huge crowd chanting in the dark. Then they entered a vast pillared hall called the Telesterion. At its height, it could hold around 3,000 people at once. And there, in that darkness, the final rite began. That is the edge of what we are allowed to know. And yet a few fragments did escape. We know the hall held a small inner sanctum at its center, a stone chamber called the anaktoron, which only the chief priest was permitted to enter. We know that at the peak of the rite, its doors opened, and a great fire poured light into the blackened hall. We know sacred objects were lifted up and shown. One detail even survives of what may have been the final revelation, and it comes from an unlikely witness. A Christian writer named Hippolytus, who set out around 200 years after Christ to expose the pagan cults. He claimed that at the climax, the high priest raised up a single ear of grain cut in silence and held it out to the initiates. That is all. After the fasting, the long march, the darkness, and the sudden blaze of light, the great secret at the heart of the ancient world may have been a stalk of harvested wheat lifted without a word. And if that sounds far too small to kill a man over, then you felt the whole problem. The object was never the secret. What mattered was what it did to the people standing in that room. Just before the climax, the initiates drank. The drink had a name, the kaikion, and even its recipe survives, written into an ancient hymn: barley, water, and a sprig of mint. On the face of it, nothing. But listen to how the people who drank it describe what came next. Plutarch, a priest himself, wrote of a great light appearing suddenly as the inner chamber opened, and of initiates falling silent, changed, filled with wonder. Cicero, the coldest of Roman lawyers, said Athens had given the world nothing greater or more divine than these mysteries. These were serious, skeptical men. A cup of barley water does not do that to them. So people asked the obvious question for centuries. What was really in the cup? That question led to a startling idea. In 1978, a chemist named Albert Hofmann, the man who first created LSD in a laboratory, joined a mythologist and a scholar of ancient Greece to publish a theory. They argued the kaikion was far more than barley water. Barley in the ancient Mediterranean was often infected by a fungus called ergot, which grows on grain in dark purple spurs. And ergot contains compounds chemically related to LSD. Their claim was breathtaking. The most sacred ritual of the ancient world may have been, in part, a controlled vision, a state of mind produced by chemistry inside a hall built to receive it. For years it was dismissed as a beautiful guess with no proof behind it, except the proof may have arrived. In Spain, at a site called Mas Castellar de Pontos, archaeologists uncovered a small sanctuary dedicated to the two goddesses of Eleusis. Inside, they found something no theory had predicted: fragments of ergot, that very fungus preserved inside a ceremonial cup. And more haunting still, traces of it locked into the hardened dental plaque of a man who had died more than 2,000 years ago in his mid-20s. Someone had actually swallowed it in a shrine to these exact gods. The fungus Hofmann had only guessed at was no longer just an idea. It was in the vessel, and it was in a dead man's teeth. But one hard problem remained. Raw ergot is a poison. In medieval Europe, eating infected grain caused a horrifying disease: burning limbs, gangrene, madness, death. So how could priestesses have served it to thousands of people year after year without killing them? For decades, that single objection sank the whole theory. Then, only recently, chemists went back to the laboratory. And they showed that the toxic parts of ergot can be separated from the mind-altering parts using little more than an alkaline solution, a process well within the reach of the ancient world. In other words, someone who knew the secret could brew a vision without brewing a death, which is exactly the kind of knowledge a guarded, inherited priesthood would protect. Now step back and see what this really means. This was not some fringe cult clinging to the edge of the Greek world. It sat at the very center of it. Poets, playwrights, and philosophers were initiated at Eleusis, and centuries later Roman emperors traveled across the sea to be admitted too. For 2,000 years, people arrived carrying the oldest fear a human being has: the fear of dying. And they left, by every account, unafraid. Ancient initiates described death afterward not as an end, but as a beginning. The Greeks who had seen the rites called themselves blessed and pitied everyone who had not. Whether that peace came from a chemical, from the story of a daughter returning from the dead, from the fasting and the darkness and the sudden blaze of light, or from all of it at once, the effect was the same. The mysteries did not argue people out of their fear of death. They showed them something that dissolved it, and everyone who felt it agreed it could not be put into words. That is why the silence held. It wasn't only the death penalty. It was that the experience itself resisted language. You cannot describe a color to someone born blind. You cannot hand another person a feeling. The initiates weren't hiding a sentence they could have simply spoken aloud. They were guarding something that fell apart the moment anyone tried to say it. Language could point toward it the way a map points toward a country. It could never be the thing itself. In the year 396, an army swept into Greece, and the sanctuary at Eleusis was destroyed. The last priests died. The rites stopped. And the secret they had defended for nearly 20 centuries, through wars, through empires, through the death penalty itself, simply went out like the light in that hall. We are left with the strangest kind of loss. Millions of people once shared an experience so profound they rebuilt their lives around it, and not one of them left us the answer. Somewhere beneath the ruins near Athens, the greatest secret of the ancient world is still being kept. And the people who could have told us chose, every single time, to carry it into the dark. Thank you for watching. If the unanswered corners of history keep you awake, stay a while. And let's keep looking into the dark together.